Hey everybody, this is Chris Mahan. Another Leader Teen podcast is coming your way. If you are new to this podcast, I want you to know that this is a parent-child podcast with an emphasis on parental leadership, something that is missing badly in today's world, especially here in America. So many homes today do not have true leadership in them, and we see the effects of this in our courtrooms, our streets, our classrooms, to the living room. So everything about this podcast is to strengthen your relationship with your kids, to help them become strong, resilient young adults, and then flourish as they go on into life. And what I've been doing for the last couple weeks is rewriting and updating my book that came out 2 years ago, right here, Parental Leadership. And it's got a new cover. The whole thing's coming on Audible. And in doing so, last week I was at a book signing and I happened to meet David Torres. David, welcome.
Thank you, Chris, and I appreciate this great opportunity that you are giving me.
So the cool thing that I liked about David is we're walking around, looking at everybody's, different authors and whatnot, and I saw David's book right here. It is, and it's a small book with a huge, huge message. So don't be fooled by the 165 pages. I think it's 165. Um, Actually, I'm sorry, it's less than that. Um, I read this in about 3 hours because I'm a slow reader. It's 121 pages, but it packs a lifetime of information. A, it, just it's insane how much stuff is in here. And you're saying, well, what's he talking about? When met David at this book signing, we're talking, and he said, "Hey, my book is about male sexual survivors, sexual abuse survivors." And I was like, "Wow, that's a tough subject." So we got to talking, and I read his book, and I just am like blown away by his story, his resiliency, the fact that he's here today, didn't fall prey to what could have been a horrible outcome because of the societal stigma, not only in just mainstream society when it comes to sexual abuse in males, but in the Latin culture.
Mhm.
So, with that, David, I'm gonna let you just jump right in, kind of tell your story, and most importantly, though, what prompted you to have the strength to say, "I've got to talk about this," because you get pretty involved in here, and you know, tell me how that came about.
So I always was drawn to write a book about my story, but when it got to the difficult areas, when I had to be more detailed, I just put it away. That happened to me a lot of times, but it wasn't until the news broke out about one of the abusers that were he was arrested basically. He's making time actually in jail right now. That I started thinking about the other survivors, and I decided to just go ahead and write my book, not knowing that my book will actually will help me with my healing process. I met Robert Marshall, who he made the forward for me, and he basically challenged me to be honest with myself. The first draft, whenever I was getting to the most difficult and vulnerable aspect of my story, I started putting sermons, and I started to go another route. And he goes, "David, you have such a powerful story." And he goes, "Why are you putting sermons in there? Like, uh, whenever the story is getting like really, really good, you go to another route." And he challenged me to be honest with myself, and that's when I really started writing my book again. And I mean, from there, while I was typing, I was crying because I needed to remember things that I didn't want to. And he helped me a lot throughout the journey of writing this book.
Wow. And that is something that I will tell our listeners here that when it comes to writing about yourself or about your family, when it's that close, and again, I'm not trying to plug my own book here, not yours, but I talk about things in here with me as well.
Hmm.
And growing up, I was not abused. Let's not, I don't want to misconstrue that. But I did grow up in a divorced home, a blended family. Grew up in the 70s and 80s, things are much different. So we all have our cross to bear, so to speak.
Hmm.
And we all have our emotional issues and things like this with our families. And for me, it was just understanding the divorce and the separation of the families and all these different things. And that was hard enough. But for you, because, and I, one of the abusers was very close to you, family
Yeah.
member,
Hmm.
and I don't want to give it away. Um, how did you feel as a young boy? Like, how old were you when this started? The abuse started.
I will say it was between the ages of 4 and 6, between
4 and 6.
that time. Yeah.
Okay. So 4 and 6 are very formidable years. 0 to 5, of course, very formidable years. And I loved your story talking about living in Puerto Rico and playing in the yard and climbing the trees and coming in at
Hmm.
dark and just the neighborhood, everybody kind of together. It was so Norman Rockwell sounding. It was just so like normal and fun. It sounded like
Hmm.
and then to have the dark side of what was really happening underneath all that was just for me it was kind of hard to read because now that I've gotten to know you, I'm picturing like how did this affect him as a little kid? And as I'm reading the book, you're talking about the Latin culture, how this type of stuff, especially for boys, is absolutely taboo. Like you do not talk about it.
Hmm.
How did you, as a young kid, have the courage, or how did you suppress all of this anger? I'm sure frustration,
Hmm.
fear, um, identity issues. How did you do that?
So I think something that we don't think about is that kids, they have resiliency uh, in them. And I guess because of me having friends in my neighborhood, we play. So I guess I was putting that in the back of my mind, but I never had anybody to basically guide me with what I was going through because, as you said, this is taboo in our
Hmm.
culture. We don't speak about it. We had that phrase, that famous phrase, "What happens at home stays at home." But not even my parents knew about it. Nobody knew. Just my sister knew, and of course myself. And basically, I was. I would say that I've always been introvert, but at the same time, when I get to know a person, like, we will play, we will do the normal stuff that kids will do, play hide and seek. We always played outside. It's not like now, where kids, they rather play video games or be
Hmm.
on TikTok. Back then it was so different. We would ride our bikes. So, but then when the nighttime will come, that's when the abuse will continue. And I cannot remember when did it stop, the abuse from my sister. I just remember that, this type of feelings that I started experimenting, and I really didn't know anything about this. This is the first time that I was experiencing abuse, and I didn't know how to react to it. I just remember the phrase, the famous phrase, "Don't say anything. We could get in trouble. We will never do it again." But then the next night it will happen again. So I would say that resiliency is in us. It's in all of us, no matter what. And from a kid's perspective, we always, I guess it's the difference in the time that we used to live in, where we play outside, and that played a big role in my life.
Well, that's something, I think the play, I know you mentioned here, this is a psychological thing where you disassociate yourself with, you kind of separate yourself from
Mhm.
reality to the play to,
Yeah.
going and hanging out with your friends, you kind of bury it. That's, I
Hmm.
think, is a natural biological trait that we all have that we want to, avoid pain, whatever the pain
Hmm.
may be, psychological, whatever, physical, and we find something to mask over that situation. And
Yeah.
as a little kid, you probably, I'm just kind of guessing here, but you probably didn't have the words to describe what was happening to you. And
No.
therefore, you just had feelings. And so you could bury it. It's probably easy. Um, how do you think, just, if, I don't know if you ever thought about it, how would your life be today, do you think, had this not happened?
Oh, way different. Like I mentioned before, I still consider myself introvert, even though I have breaking out of that shell.
Hmm.
Speaking about it has helped me a lot, but I think I would have accomplished so many things in my life, things that I really wanted to do, and now that I'm gonna hit 50 next year, so looking back at my life, and man, I could have done that, I could have done this, and I think abuse have played a big role in my life where I didn't do a lot of things. Basically because I was always in my room. I speak about this in my book where most of the time I was in isolating myself, hearing music, not talking to even my family. Like they will knock on the door just to sometimes check on myself and make sure that I was okay. But I was always the type of person that, nah, I'm not gonna try that now. Like it's always something that to this day I still think about it. Like, man, I could have done so much more, and I didn't.
Well, I was, as we were getting ready to jump in here, I jumped on and pulled up some stats, different things. And one of the things that this does is it erodes self worth. And I'm looking at right here. So many boys feel that simply being male makes them a problem in society. Some believe that they must apologize for being boys. This is I'm sorry, this was on uh, yeah, masculinity, like toxic masculinity, different things being abused. So it erodes the sense of who you are. Like,
Hmm.
why was I abused? Why did someone that I thought I could trust do this? And I think the other big problem too is in society, whether it's Latin culture, whether it's mainstream culture, whatever, we're all human beings. So I don't,
Yeah.
get too much into that, but we're all human. I think when we look at though the abuse statistics and whatnot, we think only of girls, right? We think, oh, girls get abused, boys don't do that because why wouldn't a boy want a woman to come on to him or something
Yeah.
happen? Why wouldn't? And so we see more and more of this now today in the schools where female teachers are doing things with young boys. That's coming out. So females are much more predatory than we ever thought possible.
Oh yeah.
And they probably always were, but we just didn't talk about it. And I think for young kids of boy or girl, any abuse is going to change the trajectory of your life.
Hmm.
At what age did you finally say, I can't do this anymore? Like, I just can't trust. I don't know who to trust. And I know there's a character in here. We're going to talk about that in a minute, near the end. But at what age were you when you were saying, you know, why is this happening to me all the time? And not by
I,
just one person, there were several people.
yeah, yeah. I will say my upper teenage years, like, because at one point I thought, man, I guess this is gonna be my life forever. People are gonna abuse me, especially by male figures. And at some point, by writing my book, I remember how I was gonna end my life. I remember thinking about riding my bike in the street that I used to live in, or I
Oh, I
grew
read
up.
that. Yes, yes.
That on the other street that met the street where I grew up, it was kind of like a hill. And I remember I'm just gonna ride my bike downhill and wait for a car to hit me when I get to the other street, which was the main busiest street. It was like the main street of my neighborhood.
Wow. How old
And
were you? How old were you then? If you don't mind me asking.
I was between when I started having those thoughts, I would say between the ages of 12 all the way to 16, maybe 17,
Wow.
that I always thought about doing that. And I'm glad I never did, but it was always in the back of my mind because I remember. going always to my room, and I couldn't sleep, and I would force myself to sleep. But I remember falling asleep crying because I'm like, I cannot believe that this is my life. So I'm glad that you mentioned the things that are happening out there now with teachers, because we applaud that, or people applaud. Oh, because I start reading the comments when I see video clips of, a teacher found guilty of abusing kids at her school, and I see the comments from male figures saying, "Oh, why I didn't have a teacher like that when I was going to school?" Like,
Yeah, there's a Van Halen song called "Hot for Teacher," and
yeah,
there's I think it was the Police where Sting was singing, "Don't stand so close to me." He's a teacher with a girl he picks up in a car. I
hmm,
mean, this is something that, and let's just be real, we live in a 24/7 internet based world. And I talk about this in my book about the monsters in the world and the things that are online. We live in a overly sexualized society. We
yeah,
live in a society where you can find literally anything at the on a phone and a computer, wherever, especially kids. And I know that, here in Florida, they tried to do something. I think they did do something where you cannot get onto certain websites, porn sites, with
hmm,
a certain age. But
yeah,
let's be real. We had parental lockdown stuff with my kids years ago, and they found ways around it.
oh yeah,
But even still, the fact that it's
mhm,
everywhere, it's in our advertising, it's in our movies, it's in our music,
yeah,
um, and I'm not trying to be a prude and say we can't talk about sex and those things, but age appropriate.
hmm,
And we know that a vast majority of people that buy music are young, they're teenagers, whether it's rap music or rock music or whatever it may be. And you know, we also have, and I didn't want to touch on this too much, but I think I have to just for the sake of being real. In the last couple of years, we've seen schools grooming young children with the transgender drag
yeah.
shows, all these things, the books that are in these schools that are, parents are going crazy with the school boards with, I'm not even going to name the books, but you can find clips everywhere. Does that bother you to know that in the schools they are mainstreaming what I consider to be child abuse and grooming for these young children?
Oh yeah, definitely. I have two kids, and we will always, at least I can tell you that we will always talking to our kids, because we knew when that, I remember when that started happening. And so we decided to be proactive and talk to our kids. And we told them, I know that you're gonna hear things that are in a different way at school, but this is the right way that we're teaching you about these things. And those are hard conversations, but we need to have this conversation with our kids. And this is something that I didn't have when I was growing up. I don't remember my parents ever talking to me about sex, about the difference. And it is, I think it played a big role of why I went through all these experiences, because I didn't have that. And I think it's so important that in 2025, parents be proactive, because everything that I know about sex, I learned out there,
Mm.
and by people that I shouldn't have. And I think parents these days, they just need to be proactive with their kids.
And that's what, when this happened a couple of years ago and politicians were pushing it and the federal government was pushing it in the schools, I couldn't believe it.
Hmm.
And when I was saying things about it, people turned on me as if I was being a bigot, I was being
Yeah.
a homophobe or a transphobe, whatever the term is. I'm thinking, no, these are small children
Hmm.
that have no idea what you're teaching them, and you're putting them with adults, grown men that are doing these things. And then I read your book, and I'm like, in some ways, this was happening. It was happening to you behind closed doors. The
Yeah.
grooming. We know that a pedophile, a predator is going to groom. They're going to find a kid who needs attention or wants something, or they want to be their friend. They want to find a way to bring them into the fold, so to speak.
Hmm.
And that's what happens in the last part of this book with the youth pastor.
Hmm.
Now, I know that we hear a lot of things about, priests and kids and all this stuff. Hear it for years. And the thing that I tell parents all the time or kids is, there's monsters among us. There's monsters everywhere. It can be the person on the street, it can be someone in the family, it can be the guy next door or woman next door, it can be anybody. Anybody has the ability to snap and do something that they shouldn't do,
Yeah.
and every single child is susceptible to that in whatever house you're in. It doesn't have to be Puerto Rico. It could be here in the States. It could be a
Mhm.
$1 million home to a trailer park. It doesn't matter. There is no socioeconomic or cultural barrier that says, oh, this group is someone does this and this one doesn't do that. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And, we saw it, of course, years ago with the Epstein trial
Mhm.
and what was happening there. I did a podcast years ago with the sheriff's department here on grooming and sex trafficking. So this is such a huge problem, but we only think about it when we hear it in the news. We don't think about it in our own life, our own
Yeah.
family. How hard was it for you to tell? You have sons or daughters? What are your kids?
My son is 23, my daughter just turned 19.
Okay, so you have a son and daughter. How hard was it for you to tell them what's in here?
Super hard. It was very difficult, and to tell them that one of their aunts was the abuser. I mean, they were devastated. But I needed to be real with them because I wanted them to know that this could happen in any family,
Yep.
any culture, anywhere, any settings, and they need to open their eyes. And this is why I believe that this type of conversations belongs to their parents and not to a school system.
Right.
School system is to for them to teach them about science, math, history, and that's it. Don't be telling my kids what is sex, what is abuse, what is uh, someone changing their sex. Let me be the parent of my home, and you stay on your lane and you teach about science and math. Let me do my job. But like I mentioned earlier, parents, they need to be proactive.
Right.
And, I let them ask questions. And it was a difficult conversation, but it needs to happen in our homes.
Yeah, now we've had sex ed class since back in the 50s and 60s and
Mhm.
puberty basically. I mean, I think we
Yeah.
had ours in 8th grade and we laughed about it, and then I think it was 4th or 5th grade the girls got separated to have an assembly on having their period, and those boys got out to go play softball or kickball or something. So schools have had those conversations, but not the grooming
Oh
and
no.
the acceptance and the having them walk around with. And again, I don't care what someone does. I've worked in film for 25 years. I've seen it all, but as a child, this is crossing the line to me.
Yes.
There's so much going on in a child's life as it is that we don't need to be filling their small developing brain with all this other stuff that could lead to a lifetime of despair,
Mhm.
um, suicidal thoughts, depression, anxiety, mistrust, um, just so many things. And I read so much of that. You gave a lot of great stats in here,
Mhm.
many of which I've put in my book for different things, but you really opened up my eyes with the abuse side of things. I don't talk so much about the abuse as I do just overall with everything. And I know we got to wrap things up here in just a minute. But I want to ask you something real quick. How did you tell your dad? How did your parents find out? Or do they even know?
So
They still
yeah,
alive?
they know my dad passed away, unfortunately.
Sorry to hear
But
that.
thank you. I was able to speak to my entire family. I remember, I think it was back in 2012, if I remember correctly, when I decided to speak to my family. They were visiting me for Christmas, and my pastor back then, I told him, "Hey, can you?" I decided to do this finally to speak to them. Can you basically set the tone so I can basically tell them because there was rumors already about the pastor. So I I remember in my living room, I told them I didn't go into details. I did told them, hey, I was abused 4 times. My sister was there, and they all cried, and I told them not to feel like they failed me as parents, as brothers and sisters, and but they were supporting me. Back then, I was not thinking about writing a book yet. That came later, right after the news broke out about the pastor. But they were supportive. They were supportive, and I'm glad that I had that conversation because I felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders.
Wow.
Uh, because secrecy, holding back a secret like that brings a lot of emotions, a lot of anger, a lot of issues. So for me to tell them, I felt like, man, I feel better. And I encourage anyone to break out of the silence. I mean, and I think preparing the atmosphere or the meeting is key. Because then you're gonna feel like, man, I'm glad that I did this. I have in I gotta say that this has not worked for other men. I think I told you this when we first met that I'm part of this group in Facebook where men have told us, hey, I finally told my wife or my girlfriend, and they decided to leave me.
Oh,
And I
wow.
think, and I think people need to understand that this could happen to men as well. And we have to create this safe space for them to speak. And this is the hardest part of me speaking out, trying to create this safe space for others because we're supposed to be strong. We're supposed to be the hero type. We're not broken yet. We are broken inside.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, people have left all the male figures because of they think that they're not man enough because they were abused when they were kids.
Well, I was doing some research today too on masculinity, toxic masculinity, how that's hurting and what's happening. And you mentioned like machoism in the book and different things.
Mhm.
And in my book, I've got a chapter. Which I think we're going to put you in that chapter. It's on the weak father. And the weak father is just basically the generational curse that men go
Mhm.
through. They can't speak about things, whether it's sexual abuse or feeling inadequate because of whatever it may be. The weak father feels worthless. They're in their house, they're in the room, but they're not really emotionally there. And I read part of that the other day in your book, and I underlined it. And right here, it's on page 22. Um, where we at here? Latino men are trying to navigate life, looking for love and affection in unhealthy places because of the negative impact of an emotionally absent father.
Mhm.
I was like, oh my gosh, has he read my book? And I hate to say it like that, but I think it's amazing that I didn't grow up in a Latin community.
Mhm.
I didn't grow up in Puerto Rico, but I too had that same experience sometimes where my dad didn't always feel um, worthy, and he got lost in the bottle. I've talked about that numerous times. It's nothing new. Um, Great father in terms of being there, but he had his own demons, right?
Mhm.
And because of that, I didn't always see what I should have seen. He and my mom divorced when I was 2, so I didn't even see them together. And then he and my stepmother, I never saw them hold hands. I never saw them kiss each other. It was almost like they were best friends instead of husband and wife because he was so afraid and so distant. If we went out someplace, he would stand off in the corner and just kind of wait for us. And he was never, unless he was drinking, that's where he felt safe was when he was drinking because
Yeah.
otherwise he didn't have the emotional strength to just be himself. And I saw this year and decade after decade and year after year. And so when I came up with Weak Father, I actually modeled after my dad. And so when I read this in your book, I was like, wow, this is,
It
a
happens in
universal
every
thing.
culture. Yeah,
Yep.
it happens. And
So
one thing that me and my wife decided to do is to model to our kids, because at the end of the day, they're gonna grow up, they're gonna get married, and we always kissed in front of our kids. We always held hands. To this day, I open the door to my wife, uh, and to make sure that she gets in the car properly. And I have date nights with my daughter, and I teach her what to expect from a male figure. And I'm gonna be really honest with you. I made it really hard for the one that is gonna date my daughter because
you
I
set the
mean,
expectation pretty high.
oh yeah,
That's good
because
though. That's good. That's good. That's that's the kind of thing that uh, I do that. I open doors. I actually years ago I had a female boss and we were going to some other town for a meeting or something, and I opened her door, and she kind of looked at me like, "What are you doing?" It was just habit, right? And I said, "Don't get excited. I do it for everybody." I didn't want her to think I was being weird, but it was such a habit to do those things, a courteous thing, and do whatever.
Mhm.
And I made it a point in my 20s and 30s to do those things. I never saw that as a kid. I
Yeah.
never saw that. Um, and it's I grew up. Everyone in my family is divorced. Every sibling has, well, except for one. They've all had difficulties in marriages. Um, I am now in the process of finalizing after almost 29 years. Um, haven't seen her, have not lived with her in almost six. She's out west somewhere. Um, but when I was married, I tried to do those things, open the door and do different things,
Mhm.
and people look at me like, "Why are you doing that?" That's so like, what is this, 1950? Or what, you a 1950s guy? You got to like, you're such a male chauvinist. I'm like, what are you talking about? Or you're misogynistic. I'm like, what? All these terms, all these negative terms come at you when you're trying to be, a good guy.
Yeah.
And to me, that's like healthy masculinity. You're a
Mhm.
protector. Our innate need in being is to be needed as a protector.
Mhm.
We are the provider of things, right? And we can't do that, or people make fun of us for doing it. That kind of sets those wheels in motion too, of saying, well, why? Was something wrong with me? And then when we're criticized for doing those things because society has changed a lot, that makes guys feel bad too. So couple that with, your background and the cultural expectations, society expectations, your own
Mhm.
inadequacies. I give you so much, praise and thank God you're here. When I was reading your book, I had to stop a couple times because I was like, man, how in the world you know, I thought I had it bad. I got to only see my dad every 2 weeks. This guy's going through everything under the sun. So I give you a lot of credit for that and speaking up and talking about it and having the courage to be as open and here as you are. Um, that takes a lot. And um, I'm glad I met you, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I'm going to put you in my book, and people can read more about your story. I'm going to try and put as much in there without giving your story away because I want them to buy your book. Um, but it is super important in what you're doing, and I want to just thank you for that because so many guys in today's world would not have that courage to do that. So this book is very, very important. Tell everybody where they can find it. Are you on Amazon? Where can they find your
Yeah,
book?
I'm in Amazon. I'm trying to get into other big name stores that we don't want to give them credit now, but that's my next step. But they can find it in Amazon through if they put in the search bar David M. Torres and then Live, the title of my book, they should be able to find it.
Okay. Um, I'll give you the name of my guy who does the recordings too. If you want to record, do an audible. I think this would be a great in the car and have it, let families listen to it. If they can't have the conversation because they're afraid to, they could listen to this and really share it
Hmm.
with people. I think that'd be great. So
Yeah.
that'd be awesome. Well, David, I appreciate, do you have a website or anything or just on Amazon?
They can find me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, David M. Torres Live. And I'm also on TikTok as well, so they can find me on social media.
Okay, I'll try and put this all in the notes so it'll go out everything and go out everything, go out everywhere. So, well, guys, we're gonna wrap this one up again. This is David Torres. His book is Live. It is an amazing book. It's a little book with a huge, huge story. I recommend it to everybody because what he's gone through and lived through and talks about here could happen to your child. Maybe it happened to you or someone you know. We all need to work together and take the stigma out of this horrible thing called
Yeah.
sexual abuse, and we need to take the societal stigma away from boys to come out and say, this happened without the rejection or the fear of rejection from what society can do because of the abuse that the boys go through at the hands of another male, or in David's case, both. Um, our children are our next generation. They're the future of this country, this world. It is all of our jobs to look out for them, protect them, and lead them to a safe and happy future. And it all starts with these types of conversations. So, with that, David, thank you so much. I'm going to let you go. We're going to wrap this one up. You guys have an amazing rest of your week. And I hope to get all the comments and share some great stuff. So, there you go.
All right. Thank you so much for this great opportunity.
All right, David. Thank you so much, buddy. Talk to you later.
Bye.